The sound of metal against metal rang out as her body hit the hood of the cruiser. Gasps cut through the chilly morning air. A man's voice followed, sharp and venomous. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages." The courthouse plaza froze. People turned toward the scene unfolding at the curb. A woman in a crisp black dress, heels, and a neat bun struggled to steady herself against the cold hood. Papers lay scattered on the asphalt like fallen feathers. Kesha Williams had arrived early that morning, files tucked under her arm, ready for a packed day of hearings. She parked carefully, straightened her jacket, and stepped out with her usual quiet confidence. She didn't see the patrol car roll up behind her until she heard the bark. "Ma'am, stop right there!" She turned calmly. 3 officers advanced quickly. One in front, 2 flanking him like wolves closing in. The leader's face was unforgettable. Thick jaw, buzzed hair, and a grin that didn't match the situation. "Officer Martinez, you match the description of a suspect we're looking for," he said, hand already on his holster. Kesha raised an eyebrow, steady but polite. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I work here." "Quiet!" Martinez snapped, closing the distance in 2 steps. "ID now." She reached for her bag slowly. Before her fingers touched the strap, Martinez slapped the folder from her other hand. Papers fanned into the wind, sliding across the pavement. "Trash," he muttered, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. 2 courthouse clerks paused at the steps, whispering. A man pulled out his phone, camera already rolling. Kesha took a breath, her voice calm despite the sting on her wrist where he'd grabbed her. "Officer, I'm telling you, hands behind your back." The command cut through the air like a whip. One of the other officers stepped behind her, yanking her arms back. Cold cuffs bit into her wrists. Murmurs rose from the onlookers. She heard someone say, "Isn't that?" Before the voice trailed off, unsure, Martinez seized the moment. He straightened, puffed out his chest, and turned the arrest into a performance. "This is what happens when you think you're above the law," he shouted. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. The cameras zoomed in closer. Kesha's face flushed, not with guilt, but with the deep, searing humiliation of being paraded like a criminal in the very place she commanded respect. She tried again, steady but firm. "If you'll allow me to explain—" "Shut your mouth," Martinez barked, pushing her forward toward the cruiser. Her shoulder hit the metal again, this time harder. A flash went off, then another. Reporters, always hovering near the courthouse entrance, had caught wind of the commotion. Her neatly pinned bun loosened. A few strands of hair stuck to her cheek. For the first time, she allowed herself to look out at the crowd. Some stared. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others raised their phones higher, hungry for drama. Martinez leaned close to her ear, voice dripping with mockery. "You people always think you're special, but not today." Shock burned in her chest, followed quickly by confusion. Why wasn't anyone stopping this? She looked toward the security officers stationed at the doors, men she'd walked past hundreds of times. None of them moved. As Martinez gripped her arm and began pulling her toward the courthouse steps, her heels scraped against the pavement. She stumbled once, caught herself, and straightened. The humiliation was total now. Her dignity stripped in front of colleagues, strangers, and cameras. But behind her lowered lashes, something shifted. Her breathing steadied. Her gaze hardened. A silent resolve began to build. The marble steps of the courthouse loomed ahead, towering over her like a cruel stage. Martinez glanced back, saw her composed face, and mistook it for weakness. "I can't wait to see the judge tear you apart," he sneered. Kesha said nothing. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. The crowd's noise faded into a distant hum. The cuffs were still tight. Her wrists burned. But in her silence, something dangerous and unshakable was forming. As they dragged her up the steps, cameras followed like vultures. The great courthouse doors swung open. And with one last mocking tug, Martinez pulled her inside, completely unaware of who he had just humiliated. The metallic clink of handcuffs echoed down the courthouse corridor like a cruel reminder. Kesha's wrists throbbed with every step. The same halls where she normally walked with quiet authority now swallowed her whole. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Martinez gripped her arm tighter than necessary, dragging her past the security desk with exaggerated pride. "Move it," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for nearby clerks to hear. She recognized faces instantly, people she saw every day. Court officers, clerks, bailiffs. Some gasped softly when they saw her in cuffs. Others froze mid-task, eyes wide with disbelief. Not one of them stepped forward. A security guard she'd greeted every morning for 3 years stared, his mouth slightly open. His hand twitched toward his radio, but didn't lift it. The weight of collective silence pressed on her chest like a stone. Martinez caught her glance toward the guard and sneered. "What? You expecting a fan club?" He jerked her forward again, making sure to drag her right through the busiest hallway, the one lined with glass walls and surveillance cameras at every corner. Kesha's eyes flicked upward briefly, noting their positions. Left corridor, over the elevators, above the main stairwell. Each camera lens glinted like a quiet witness. She started mentally mapping angles, entrances, exits. Every humiliating second was also a calculation. Martinez leaned closer, voice dripping with mockery. "You think you're special, don't you? Fancy clothes, fancy walk. In here, you're just another thug." His words stung, but she didn't answer. Silence was her shield now. A junior clerk at the records window whispered urgently to a colleague, "That's Judge Williams." The words carried just far enough. Martinez spun his head, eyes narrowing. "What was that?" His voice cracked like a whip through the hallway. The clerk paled, shrinking back behind the counter. "That's what I thought," he said, smirking, before turning his glare on Kesha again. "Not so powerful now, huh?" They reached the service elevator. The usual marble corridors gave way to dim back halls, the ones few civilians ever saw. The air grew colder. The buzzing fluorescent lights flickered overhead as the elevator doors clanged shut behind them. Inside, Martinez stood uncomfortably close, the other 2 officers chuckling behind him. "Smile for the cameras," one said, pulling out a phone. Kesha kept her gaze fixed forward, jaw tight. Her heart raced, but beneath the racing pulse, something sharper was forming. A flicker of fury. She replayed every step in her mind. The cameras, the faces, the silence. Evidence. Witnesses. Patterns. When the doors slid open, they shoved her forward again. The holding area smelled of disinfectant and damp concrete. The metal door screeched as Martinez pushed it open and ushered her inside a narrow cell. Bare bench, peeling paint, no windows. "This suits you better," he said with a grin. The officers laughed, their voices bouncing off the walls. The door slammed shut behind her with a heavy finality. Their footsteps retreated down the hall, fading into muffled snickers. For a brief moment, the humiliation threatened to crush her. She sat down slowly on the cold bench, cuffs still digging into her wrists, head bowed, not in defeat, but in thought. She inhaled deeply. Once. Twice. The fury that flared moments ago settled into something steadier. Strategy. The cameras. The faces. The clerk who whispered her name. Every second of this would matter. She could feel it. The door clanked. A bailiff stepped in hesitantly, hat in his hands, face pale as chalk. He glanced over his shoulder, then at her. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake." Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his, calm and piercing. Before he could finish, Martinez's voice thundered down the corridor. "No, she's going before the judge now." The bailiff flinched. Martinez stormed into view. A grin stretched across his face like this was a game he couldn't lose. Kesha didn't move. She just watched him, silent and unblinking. He had no idea what kind of storm he'd just walked into. In a cramped office down the hall, Martinez leaned over a stack of paperwork, scrawling across forms with the swagger of a man who believed no one would question him. He dictated charges to a clerk in a bored tone: resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, assault on an officer. Each word he uttered was a lie, layered over the truth like cheap paint on rotting wood. Meanwhile, in the silence of the holding cell, Kesha sat motionless, wrists bruised, her back straight despite the cold wall behind her. Her mind drifted, not in surrender, but back through time, to the road that had led her to this moment. She remembered the late nights in a cramped apartment, law books stacked to the ceiling. She'd balanced 3 part-time jobs just to afford tuition, scribbling notes under flickering kitchen lights while the city outside slept. There had been days when exhaustion clawed at her bones, when professors doubted her, when classmates whispered that someone like her didn't belong in the top ranks. But Kesha had always answered doubt with relentless focus. She saw herself in the courtroom years ago, fresh out of law school, arguing her first case. Her voice shook at first, but then steadied, like steel being forged under pressure. By the end of that trial, even the opposing counsel had watched her with quiet respect. Then came the climb. Prosecutor, public defender, circuit judge. Each step was hard-won, each promotion earned through meticulous work and an unshakable sense of justice. And finally, the moment that changed everything: being sworn in as the youngest black female judge in the state's history. Cameras flashed. Her family cried. She'd looked up at the courthouse that day with pride, never imagining that same building would one day echo with the sound of cuffs around her wrists. Her reputation grew quickly. Fair, sharp, uncompromising. Lawyers spoke her name with a mix of respect and fear. Defendants found in her a judge who listened, not to excuses, but to truth. She'd become known for her ability to cut through lies with surgical precision, never raising her voice, only wielding calm authority like a blade. But authority didn't make her untouchable. She knew that. Somewhere else in the building, Martinez chuckled as he stamped the last sheet of paperwork. He was a man who thrived on intimidation. His file, buried deep within department records, told a darker story. 6 complaints of excessive force, 4 allegations of racial profiling, 2 internal investigations quietly closed with insufficient evidence. Patterns emerged like stains beneath white paint. Minorities targeted during traffic stops. Trumped-up charges. Testimonies that mysteriously vanished. Martinez had built his career not on justice, but on fear, and a system that turned away when he crossed the line. Kesha knew those records. She'd spent weeks reviewing them in preparation for a hearing scheduled that very morning. A case challenging Martinez's department's pattern of misconduct had landed on her desk. She had arrived at the courthouse ready to preside over it. That was the irony. The man who cuffed her was one of the very officers whose conduct she was meant to examine. A small, sharp smile flickered on her lips at the thought. Not amusement, but recognition. Fate had an uncanny way of revealing truth at the most brutal times. Outside the holding cell, keys rattled. An officer opened the door. "Time to go," he muttered, avoiding her eyes. They led her down the hall once again, wrists still bound, steps echoing against the marble floors. This time the crowd had grown. Word had spread fast. Someone important had been arrested, though not everyone knew who. She caught fragments of whispers. Is that really her? Why's she in cuffs? This can't be real. Martinez stood at the end of the corridor, waiting. His face was alight with the smug grin of a man who thought he'd won a game no one else understood. As they pushed the heavy courtroom doors open, Kesha's eyes instinctively lifted to the judge's bench. Empty. The massive wooden seat, usually the symbol of law and order, loomed vacant. Murmurs spread like a wave through the spectators. Even the prosecutor looked unsettled, glancing around as if expecting someone to appear. Martinez leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "This'll be fun," he whispered. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just stared straight ahead at the empty bench, her mind sharpening like a blade. He thought he was walking her to humiliation. He had no idea he was walking her toward his reckoning. The courtroom buzzed like a hive unsettled. Whispers darted between rows of wooden benches as eyes flicked from Kesha's handcuffs to the empty judge's bench. A clerk shuffled papers nervously. A bailiff cleared his throat, uncertain whether to announce something or stay silent. Then, from the center of the room, a clear, unwavering voice cut through the noise. "You're looking at her!" Every head turned. Kesha stood straighter, shoulders squared, the chains at her wrists catching the light like stage spotlights. The room fell into stunned silence, broken only by a single incredulous laugh. Martinez's. He threw his head back, smirking. "That's cute," he drawled. "She thinks she's still somebody." But no one joined him. The prosecutor's jaw slackened. A few spectators audibly gasped. A young intern near the wall whispered, "Wait, is she serious?" Kesha met Martinez's gaze steadily. "Remove the cuffs," she said. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. The quiet authority in her tone carried further than any shout could. Martinez took a step closer, his grin widening as if savoring the last drops of his imagined victory. "No one's removing anything," he sneered. "You're under arrest, remember? In here. You don't give the orders." For a split second, the air thickened, an invisible standoff between power assumed and power earned. Then the double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. A senior clerk, flushed and breathless, rushed in holding a thick folder of official documents. "Wait!" she shouted. "Stop everything!" She weaved through the murmuring crowd, nearly tripping over a bench, and thrust the folder toward the bailiff. He flipped through it, eyes widening, then passed it to the prosecutor, who immediately blanched. Finally, the documents landed in Martinez's hands. His cocky smile faltered as his eyes skimmed the top page. Judicial appointment. Honor Kesha L. Freeman, presiding judge, 5th Circuit Court. Her photograph, her signature, the seal of the state. Unmistakable. The silence that followed was seismic. A murmur swelled from the gallery. Not mocking this time, but awed, confused, even fearful. Someone whispered, "She's the judge." Another hissed, "He arrested the judge?" Martinez's hands tightened on the folder. This doesn't change anything," he stammered, but his voice lacked its earlier bravado. Kesha's chin lifted slightly. "Take them off." The bailiff stepped forward now, not hesitantly but with renewed certainty, and unlocked her cuffs with a sharp metallic click. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot, signaling a shift no one could ignore. She rubbed her wrists slowly, deliberately, never taking her eyes off Martinez. Then, without a word, she began to walk up the steps toward the bench. Each step landed like a drumbeat. She paused before the bench, where her black judicial robe hung neatly on its hook, just as she'd left it that morning. She lifted it with both hands, the heavy fabric folding over her arms. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as she began to button each clasp one by one. Click, click, click. It wasn't just a robe. It was a reclamation of authority. With each button, the dynamic of the room recalibrated itself. The same security guards who had dragged her through the halls now shifted uncomfortably, unsure where to look. The prosecutor lowered his gaze. Even the clerk who had once whispered her name in fear now stood taller, pride flickering behind her eyes. Martinez, for the first time, didn't look amused. He looked cornered. Kesha stepped up to the bench, the robe settling around her like armor. She stood behind the seat for a long moment, surveying the courtroom, the room that had seen her humiliated hours earlier. Then, with a quiet grace that carried more weight than any grand gesture, she sat. Her hands rested on the polished wood. Her eyes swept over the gallery, then fixed on Martinez. "Let's proceed," she said, reaching for the gavel. Her hand closed around it firmly. The wood was warm, familiar, powerful. "Officer!" The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. The gallery erupted in murmurs again, this time tinged with awe. Martinez's smirk was gone entirely now, replaced by the tight jaw of a man realizing he'd built his arrogance on quicksand. In that instant, Kesha wasn't the woman in handcuffs anymore. She was the judge, the authority, the reckoning, and Martinez was no longer the man dragging her through corridors. He was the one standing below her, under the gaze of the very seat he thought she'd never return to. The gavel hovered. The next moment would decide everything. The gavel struck once, sharp and commanding. The restless murmurs in the courtroom evaporated into tense silence. All eyes were fixed on the woman seated at the bench. No longer a handcuffed suspect, but Judge Kesha Williams, cloaked in authority and unshaken poise. Before her stood Officer Martinez, no longer swaggering. His hands rested behind his back, but his jaw was clenched, his eyes darting like a trapped animal searching for an escape. Kesha's voice carried through the chamber. Calm, deliberate, every syllable slicing through the air like a scalpel. "Let's begin," she said. "First, I want the security room to bring in the surveillance footage from the courthouse entrance." "Play back, full sequence." The bailiff nodded and disappeared down the hall. A few minutes later, the lights dimmed slightly as the projector flickered to life. The courtroom's attention turned toward the large monitor mounted above the witness stand. The footage began. There she was, stepping out of her car, files in hand, the same crisp black dress she wore just hours earlier. She looked calm, unaware of the ambush about to unfold. Then Martinez appeared on screen, flanked by two officers. He moved aggressively, closing the distance in seconds. The footage clearly showed her raising her hands in a peaceful gesture, speaking calmly. But before she could finish, Martinez struck the folder from her grasp, sending papers flying across the lot. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. On screen, Martinez slammed her against the hood. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages," his voice rang out from the body mic, synced with the footage. In the gallery, someone audibly muttered, "Oh my God." Another voice whispered, "He didn't even ask for ID." Kesha's expression didn't change. Her gaze remained locked on the screen, steady and clinical. She wasn't watching as the victim. She was watching as a judge dissecting evidence. The footage played on, showing Martinez forcing her into cuffs while the crowd filmed on their phones, his voice dripping with cruelty as he performed the arrest like theater. When the lights returned to full brightness, the silence was thick. Even the prosecutor looked pale, glancing nervously at Martinez. Kesha leaned forward slightly. "Officer Martinez," she said, voice steady, "do you wish to amend your statement before we proceed?" He straightened, trying to recover his bravado. "The footage doesn't tell the whole story," he said quickly. She matched the suspect's description. "I acted in good faith." "Good faith," Kesha interrupted softly, while calling her trash and filthy. While ignoring her attempts to identify herself, his mouth opened, then closed. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. She continued, each question like a hammer blow. "Did she resist arrest?" "No." "Did she threaten you?" "No." "Did you verify her identity before detaining her?" "No." The prosecutor slowly began backing away from the lectern, as if physically distancing from the fallout. Kesha didn't raise her voice, but her presence filled every inch of the courtroom. Officer Martinez, you filed a statement claiming Ms. Williams, she paused, letting the irony sink in, matched a violent fugitive. Yet surveillance shows no attempt at verification. No probable cause, no threat. Do you have an explanation? He stammered. I thought she might run. We were under pressure. It was chaotic. Chaotic? She repeated. It looks quite orderly to me. You approached. You struck. You humiliated. His contradictions piled up like rubble from a collapsing wall. The more he spoke, the clearer his deception became. His earlier confidence evaporated under the relentless precision of her questioning. The spectators sat frozen. The shift was palpable. Hours earlier, Martinez had controlled the narrative, strutting with unchecked arrogance. Now, it was Kesha holding the floor, wielding the truth like a blade. Her calm power radiated. She didn't gloat, didn't shout. She simply revealed. And, with every revelation, Martinez shrank. The prosecutor finally cleared his throat. Your Honor, he said carefully, it appears there may have been a grave procedural error. The district has no interest in— Sit down, counselor, Kesha said evenly. We're not finished. The room held its breath. Martinez's eyes widened, realizing this wasn't going to be smoothed over with polite apologies and legal jargon. Kesha folded her hands. Officer Martinez, she said slowly, almost gently, are you aware that this isn't the only footage we have? His brow furrowed. What? The courtroom lights dimmed again, but this time not for the projector. The rear doors opened. Two men in dark suits entered, badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. They were followed by two federal investigators, their presence heavy and unmistakable. They moved with quiet authority, their gaze locked on Martinez. A chill swept through the room. Even the spectators straightened instinctively. Martinez turned toward them, confusion giving way to fear. Kesha's gaze didn't waver. I believe, she said softly, they have additional evidence to present. The investigators stepped forward as the gavel struck once more, the sound echoing like a warning, and just like that, the hunter stood exposed, with nowhere left to run. Martinez's knuckles whitened as the two federal agents stepped closer, their badges glinting beneath the courtroom lights. The color drained from his face, his earlier arrogance replaced by the unmistakable look of a man cornered. The agents didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. Their very presence carried the weight of authority. Officer Martinez, the taller one said, we need to have a word. Now. Whispers flared in the gallery like sparks catching dry grass. Clerks craned their necks. Reporters scribbled furiously. Martinez swallowed hard, darting a glance toward the prosecutor's table. But no one met his eye. Kesha leaned back in her chair, watching him with quiet precision. Her calmness only heightened the intensity of the moment. For the record, she said evenly, these agents are here at my request. A stunned murmur rolled through the room. Her gaze swept across the courtroom. Weeks ago, this court received multiple complaints against Officer Martinez. Complaints that had been buried, ignored, or dismissed. I authorized a preliminary investigation into patterns of misconduct, excessive force, racial targeting, tampering with reports. Martinez stiffened. Yes, she cut in smoothly. I did. And when you arrested me this morning, you handed the investigators exactly what they were missing. Undeniable proof of your behavior. On tape, in public. Under oath. The weight of her words hit the room like a thunderclap. People who had earlier watched her humiliation now leaned forward, gripped by the unraveling spectacle. The agents opened a folder thick with documents. One began reading a statement. Over the past 18 months, Officer Martinez has been the subject of 23 complaints. Lies, Martinez barked, his voice cracking under pressure. Including 5 incidents involving unlawful detention and verbal abuse targeting Black and Latino citizens. All were quietly closed without disciplinary action. Gasps rippled through the room. Kesha's voice was calm but sharp. "Bring in the witnesses." The courtroom doors opened. A line of individuals entered, men and women, young and old. Some were nervous, others resolute. Each took the stand one by one, recounting their encounters with Martinez. A middle-aged man spoke first. He pulled me over for no reason, said my car looked stolen. I had just bought it. A teenage girl followed, trembling as she held the microphone. He called me a liar when I said I was walking home from school. He searched my bag for drugs. With each testimony, Martinez's face tightened. His defenses began to crumble under the sheer weight of accumulated truth. The prosecutor had given up trying to intervene. This wasn't a trial anymore. It was a reckoning, Martinez suddenly snapped. "They're all lying," he shouted, pointing at the witnesses. "Every single one of them. You people don't understand. These animals—" The words were out before he could stop them. The entire courtroom froze. His voice had echoed against the walls, every hateful syllable captured by microphones and recorders. Kesha's expression didn't flinch. But the gallery! The gallery shifted. Shock turned into collective silence, the kind that burns hotter than any outcry. Even his fellow officers in the back row exchanged uneasy glances. "You've just destroyed your own defense," Kesha said quietly. Martinez looked around, realizing too late what he'd done. The agents exchanged a brief glance and stepped closer. "This is over," one said flatly, but Martinez wasn't ready to accept defeat. His breathing quickened. His eyes darted toward the exit. Then, in a burst of panic, he shoved past the prosecutor's table, sending papers flying, and sprinted toward the back of the courtroom. The crowd erupted, not in laughter, but in collective shock. Before he reached the doors, 3 U.S. Marshals surged in from the hallway, surrounding him in seconds. Their boots echoed against the marble floor as they boxed him in, their hands ready but controlled. "Officer Martinez," the lead marshal said, "you're not going anywhere." Martinez twisted, searching for an escape that didn't exist. His swagger was gone, replaced by the frantic movements of a man watching his power dissolve. From the bench, Kesha rose slowly. Her voice rang out through the courtroom, steady and resonant. "This court is not adjourned." The marshals turned Martinez toward her, forcing him to face the woman he had once shoved against a hood. She stepped forward, gavel in hand. "It's just beginning." The words echoed off the high ceilings, lingering like a verdict. The courtroom, once a stage for her humiliation, had become the chamber of his downfall. Martinez lowered his head as the marshals closed in. The trap had been set long before this day, and now it had snapped shut. The air in the courtroom was electric, thick with anticipation, cameras whirring like cicadas outside, their flashes leaking through the tall courthouse windows. The day had come. The man who once strutted through these halls with unchecked arrogance now sat at the defendant's table, shackled, his orange jumpsuit a bitter contrast to the polished wood surrounding him. The hook had been set days ago. Now it was Judgment Day. Kesha Williams entered from her chambers, every step measured and steady. She wasn't walking toward a confrontation anymore. She was walking toward closure. Her black robe flowed behind her like a banner of authority reclaimed. The gallery rose to its feet, silent, not out of formality, but respect. She took her seat. Her gaze swept over the packed room. Victims, press, fellow judges, officers, community members. And at the center, Martinez, head lowered, jaw tight, wrists cuffed. "Court is now in session," she said, her voice firm, echoing through the chamber. The prosecution rose first. Boxes of evidence were wheeled in, files, hard drives, recordings. "What you are about to see," the prosecutor began, "is not one mistake. It is a decade of unchecked abuse, hidden beneath layers of falsified reports, silenced complaints, and intimidation." They played footage on the large screen. grainy clips from traffic stops, body cam recordings, courthouse surveillance. Over and over, Martinez's voice rang out. Mocking, threatening, racially charged. Instances where suspects were shoved without cause. Reports where timestamps didn't match the videos. Cases dismissed quietly. Victims scared into silence. With each clip, the atmosphere thickened. The gallery shifted between gasps, murmurs, and stunned silence. Even some officers in uniform averted their eyes. Then came the testimonies. A young man took the stand first. He stopped me on my way to work. Said my car fit the description. When I tried to ask what description, he slammed me against the hood. I missed my shift. I lost my job that day. His voice shook, but his eyes held steady. A middle-aged woman followed, clutching a crumpled tissue. He told me people like me didn't belong in this neighborhood. I lived there for 15 years. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she spoke. One after another, they came. Each story another brick in the wall of truth surrounding Martinez. Their pain filled the room, but so did their strength. By the third hour, the courtroom had shifted. The weight wasn't just legal, it was human. Kesha sat through it all, composed. She didn't glare. She didn't gloat. Her role wasn't revenge, it was justice embodied. Her questions were surgical, piercing inconsistencies without theatrics. Officer Martinez, she asked calmly at one point, do you deny authoring these reports? Martinez's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. My client has no comment. Kesha's eyes didn't waver. Noted. By afternoon, the jury had heard enough. Deliberation was brief. When they returned, the four persons stood, paper in hand. On all counts of civil rights violations, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice, we find the defendant, Officer Anthony Martinez, guilty. The words reverberated through the room. Martinez's shoulders sagged. For the first time, he wasn't the loudest man in the room. He was the smallest. Kesha's gavel came down with a single decisive strike. Anthony Martinez, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Your badge represented the law. You chose to weaponize it against the innocent. Today, the law answers back. The gallery erupted, not with cheers, but with a deep, collective exhale. Victims wept. Strangers embraced. Reporters scrambled to push their microphones toward the doors, their voices overlapping in frantic excitement. Outside, the courthouse steps swarmed with media. The same cameras that had captured her humiliation, the moment she'd been slammed against a hood in her black dress, were now capturing her walk down those same steps in full judicial robes. Flashbulbs exploded. News vans crowded the street. Inside, Martinez was led away in chains, passing under the very archway where he once dragged her. He kept his head down, the sound of his shackles clinking like punctuation marks to his fall from power. As Kesha exited the building, a wall of reporters surged forward. "Judge Williams!" someone shouted. "How does it feel to see justice served?" "Judge, what message do you have for officers who abuse their power?" Another called. Then one question pierced through the clamor, loud and clear. "Judge Williams, what gave you the strength to face this?" She stopped at the top of the steps, the cool breeze catching the edge of her robe. Cameras froze on her. The crowd quieted. Kesha looked out, not at the reporters, but beyond them, to the people who had testified, to the community that had watched her humiliation and now witnessed her triumph. Her eyes softened, but she didn't speak. Not yet. She turned slightly, letting the silence linger, powerful in its restraint. The unanswered question hung in the air like a final drumbeat. This wasn't the end. It was the pause before the moral, the moment before the lesson took shape. The chambers were quiet, the chaos of the day now a distant hum beyond the heavy wooden door. Kesha stood alone by the tall window, fingers gently resting on the sill. Outside, the courthouse courtyard glowed beneath the evening lights. The crowd was still there, Reporters packing up, families embracing, a city exhaling after a storm. She reached up and slowly unfastened the buttons of her robe, one by one until it slipped from her shoulders and rested neatly over the chair. Without it, she was no less powerful, just more human. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman composed, but her eyes, they held memories. She closed them, and in a flash, she was back on that gray morning. The hood of the cruiser was cold beneath her cheek. The sting of Martinez's words, "Filthy animals like you belong in cages." The sound of the crowd's laughter, the humiliation burning through her veins like acid. For a heartbeat, she'd wanted to scream, to fight, to let rage consume her. But she hadn't. She had chosen something harder. She had chosen strategy. She had chosen dignity. And that choice had changed everything. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained. A knock at the door broke her reverie. Her clerk entered cautiously. "Judge Williams, the press is still waiting, and the Chief Justice called. He's asking for your statement regarding the investigations." Kesha nodded slowly. "Tell him. They begin tonight," the clerk blinked. "Tonight?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Every case Martinez ever touched. Every report, every witness, every dismissal. We're reopening all of it." The clerk's eyes widened, not in fear, but admiration. "I'll make the calls." As the door closed, Kesha turned back to the window. She wasn't just closing a chapter. She was opening a new one, for her court, for her community, for everyone who had been silenced. Later that evening, she stepped back into the main courtroom. The lights were dimmer now, but the benches were still filled. Court officials, community leaders, victims, journalists. This time, no one whispered. All eyes were on her. She walked to the bench, not as someone reclaiming it, but as someone setting its foundation anew. She stood tall. No robe needed. "When I stood here this morning," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "I was not a judge. I was a woman in handcuffs, humiliated in front of you all. Many of you saw it. Some filmed it. Some looked away. I don't blame you. You saw power and fear." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. But what happened next wasn't just my story. It was a mirror reflecting what happens when arrogance goes unchecked, when systems protect the abuser instead of the abused. But it also showed something else. Her gaze swept the room. Firm, kind, unflinching. It showed what happens when dignity stands its ground. Dignity isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It endures. It strategizes. And when the time is right, it acts. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. She continued, "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. Martinez's fall is not the end. It's the beginning. From tonight, every case he touched will be reviewed. Every voice silenced will be heard. No one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it." The applause started softly, almost hesitant, then grew into a wave that filled the chamber. Some stood. Some wiped their eyes. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing history was being recorded not just in verdicts, but in resolve. As the night deepened, Kesha stepped out through the courthouse doors. The same stone steps where not long ago she had been dragged in handcuffs. Now, the crowd parted for her. Not in fear, but in respect. Flash bulbs popped like fireworks. Applause rolled down the steps like thunder. Strangers called out her name. Victims who had once felt powerless now clapped with tears in their eyes. She didn't wave. She simply walked. Calm, poised, the embodiment of the justice she served. The camera zoomed in slowly as her figure descended the stairs, bathed in golden streetlight. Never underestimate the quiet strength of dignity. One calm choice can turn humiliation into history. Share this story to remind the world. Justice always finds its seat.